In this video, I want to talk about a fairly recent, fairly modern argument for the existence of God that's become popular among theists and particularly creationists, and that is the fine-tuning argument. It doesn't really have a classical philosophical formulation that I know of, although even if I did, I would still find the argument ridiculous, and that's because it's an extremely nebulous argument. And by nebulous, I mean that there's multiple ways in which the argument is made, is argued. In this video, I hope to shed some light on my opinion on why the fine-tuning argument fails absolutely miserably, and why it's downright ridiculous and absurd. The fine-tuning argument, the main formulation that I've seen theists attempt to use, is that the fundamental forces of the universe, the gravity, chemistry, the way things work, the laws of nature essentially, are set up in such a way, they say, that the universe is fine-tuned for human life or intelligent life. It differs depending on who's making the argument, etc. If gravity was a little bit different, galaxies wouldn't have formed. Stars wouldn't have formed. Planetary accretion wouldn't have worked the way it did. Evolution wouldn't have even been possible. And so, doesn't it make more sense to say there's some sort of intelligent design here, there's some sort of grand creator? So that's fine-tuning on the universal scale. One of the main problems with the argument is that it can be made at almost any scale. The smaller the scale, the closer the resemblance of the argument to irreducible complexity and simply an argument from ignorance. Creationists mainly come in when you are applying fine-tuning argument to the Earth itself. If the air were a little bit different, we wouldn't be able to breathe it. It's the sort of cart before the horse misunderstanding of nature that you would expect from a creationist. But there's this idea, a little bit closer to the sun, and we would be sucked in. A little bit farther away, and we would be Mars. We'd be too cold for the evolution of life, or the creation of life, or the survival of life, or whatever it is they're positing. Basically, what this argument boils down to is we have a given situation, a given state of affairs for the universe. Let's call it X. The universe developed to state X due to the cause and effect of natural processes, which even theists acknowledge that most of what happens in the universe is governed by purely natural processes. There are some theists who will see a miracle every time a baby is born, but most theists understand that chemistry is what's going on with organisms. They just think that the initial spark, and perhaps even every species individually, was created by God, but not every individual of every species. Reproduction took over. Be fruitful and multiply took over. There's an acknowledgement that natural processes are how we got to X. And it's as if they're throwing the natural processes out the window all of a sudden. All of a sudden, there has to be magic somewhere. All of a sudden, it couldn't have happened all on its own. Even though they acknowledge that most of the time, it happens on its own without magic. Because you can go down to a microscopic level and say, well, this puddle is fine-tuned for bacteria. Look at all the bacteria living in this puddle. I mean, do you really think that all those bacteria could live in that puddle if it wasn't fine-tuned for their existence? So it falls apart the moment you introduce any scale that is different from their attempts at the universal scale and the Earth scale, the solar system scale. And of course, those scales don't work either. If you really expand out to a universal level, the argument boils down to state of affairs X has allowed for the development, or at least the survival of, intelligent life, being humans. If state of affairs X had been even slightly different, it is entirely possible, and in fact entirely likely, that intelligent life would not have developed and or would not have been able to survive. Therefore, God. So you can see where that doesn't work. You can see where that doesn't add up at all. Things could be different. Things are not different. Therefore, God. And I think it comes down to the fact that some scientists have expressed an interest in fine-tuning. Some scientists are quote mined or taken out of context as admitting to fine-tuning. And so there's this assumption that fine-tuning is a problem within science, that scientists are now attempting to explain away the fine-tuning of the universe, when really it's just kind of a curiosity that if things were different, even a little, things would be colossally different. Because again, we're talking about the fundamental forces that hold our universe together, the descriptive laws that the universe is observed to obey. If things were just different with the way the universe had turned out, things could be vastly different from what we observe. We're going to get a little bit deeper into why this argument doesn't make sense, and even Neil deGrasse Tyson has brought up, is the fact that the universe is not, in any sense, fine-tuned for human survival, that this is an absurd cart before the horse idea. That, of course, human beings are adapted to our environment, and that's obvious, even if you're a creationist. You acknowledge that certain peoples, certain ethnic groups, for instance, are adapted to their environment in remarkable ways. We're talking about, genetic differences and physical differences that are obviously adaptations to the environment. So there's an acknowledgement, at least for most creationists and most theists, again, that this can all happen naturally. Basically, they're admitting little bits of defeat. Arguments like this are meant to reinforce, they're meant to sound scientifically plausible enough, and logically sound enough. And then you pull some quote from a scientist talking about fine-tuning out, and all of a sudden everyone has their faith strengthened by that. Arguments like this aren't about actually convincing people with serious doubts. They're about convincing the already mostly convinced. So let's talk about how the universe is not fine-tuned for life. Let's talk about how deadly the universe is to humans. On an individual level, on an extinction level, the universe is not kind. And of course, we've all seen Jurassic Park. We all know that extinctions happen. The species are wiped out. So, you've got asteroid impacts. That's just one way. You've got supervolcano eruptions. You've got tectonic activity, massive earthquakes. You've got harmful radiation from our own star, but you've also got the potential for massive gamma bursts from stars that could wipe out life on Earth in a matter of months. Of course, our own sun could go supernova. It's not likely to, but it could. So that's the extinction level possibilities. But there's also the individual level. There's the fact that we can't survive in space. I mean, most of the universe is empty space. Keep in mind that whether you accept the existence of dark matter and dark energy, it's still an established scientific fact that the universe is not made up primarily of matter. So, if matter only makes up a couple percentage points of the universe, and we're made of matter, what does that tell you about this grand designer that they believe fine-tuned the universe for us? Well, he fine-tuned it so well that a tiny sliver of the universe is actually matter, is actually what we interact with on an everyday level and can observe with our eyes. We can observe only a tiny fraction of the universe without the aid of instruments. And then there's still things like neutrinos and dark matter and dark energy and things we've probably never even hypothetically thought of that we can't detect at all, even with instruments. So it's so fine-tuned for us, it's so made for us, it's so designed just for us. God thought we were so special that we could see this tiny sliver of the universe. Yeah, sounds plausible. And then, of course, there's the fact that if you walked around on any other planet, you would die. We have yet to find a planet with a confirmed, breathable atmosphere other than Earth, even here in our own solar system. And of course, we're stranded here. Until humanity gets its act together, we are stuck on planet Earth, with people who believe that it was created especially for them, for their use and their enjoyment, and for them to have dominion over, which is a scary thought. And it's part of why I do what I do. Now, there are more deistic and unfalsifiable versions of the argument, which are less assailable, mainly because they are unfalsifiable. But a more deistic version of the argument is basically that the universe is conducive for the evolution of intelligent life, not for the development of human life on Earth, not for the development of any specific species, not for the development of anything except for eventually we get life. And it's intelligent, relatively speaking. So the idea of a cosmic programmer, of a sort of deistic grand architect, is a little bit more appealing, but it's still unfalsifiable, and it's still based on this argument from ignorance. Well, things are the way they are. Wow, look at life. Look at how beautiful it is. Look at it thriving. Look at the galaxies and the nebulas. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's incredible. How can you not see the hand of God in all of that? And that's what it comes down to. It's complex, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. And it is the way it is. And if it wasn't the way it was, it'd be hard to imagine. And I'll admit, that's absolutely true. If it wasn't the way it was, and we weren't here, we wouldn't be able to really observe it, or study it, or look around, or learn about it. But we are here. Things are the way they are. And I see no reason to assume, at any level, at any scale, at any point, that that's because of magic, or the supernatural, or something completely unfalsifiable, like a cosmic architect. These arguments are meant to reinforce beliefs, not create new beliefs. When I used to be a Christian, I can remember using Pascal's wager. I didn't know what it was called at the time, but I'd heard it from a youth minister, and I thought about using it on my friends who were less than convinced. And I tried. I can honestly remember one night looking at the stars with my friend and saying, look at it this way. If you believe in God and you're wrong, no big deal. You just die. But if you believe in God and you're right, you go to heaven. You get something good. There's a benefit. But if you don't believe and you die, no big deal. You're just dead. But if you don't believe and there is a God, well, then you're in trouble. There are so many problems with Pascal's wager. I won't go into them in this video. But if you already believe, it can be persuasive. Surprisingly persuasive. Especially if you're living in a first world country, where Christianity is really the only religion, and where really, Christianity is only competing against itself. It pretends to be persecuted, of course, but really, its main detractor is itself. Its own other denominations. Mormonism, Catholicism, Protestantism, Evangelicals, Pentecostal, Southern Baptist, etc., etc., etc. Thousands upon thousands. Obviously, they're arguing over something. And if it really was just Pascal's wager, would they bother arguing? If they all believed they were safe? If there wasn't any doubt at all?